The meridian always felt different after 10. By then, the noise of the dinner rush had thinned to a low murmur. The crystal chandeliers dimmed just enough to flatter aging skin and expensive jewelry. The white tablecloths glowed softly in the half-light, wine glasses catching fractured reflections of the harbour lights beyond the windows. It was the kind of place where Charleston's elite came to pretend the world outside didn't exist, where secrets could be traded under linen napkins, and no one ever raised their voice. Lena Hart moved through that world like a ghost. At 26, she had perfected the art of being invisible. The black server's uniform hung a little loose on her frame, the starched apron tied tight around her waist. Her name tag read Lena in neat block letters, but even that wasn't really hers. She walked between tables with effortless grace, topping off water, clearing plates, offering polite, practiced smiles that never lingered long enough to invite conversation. The more she blended into the background, the safer she felt. Blending in was the only reason she'd survived this long. She was refilling a glass at table 12 when she felt it a small, strange prickle at the back of her neck. It wasn't anything she could see. Not yet. It was the subtle shift in air pressure when someone truly dangerous walked into a room. She'd grown up reading danger the way other people read weather, measuring a man's temper by the way he closed a door, guessing his mood from the sound of his footsteps in the hall. Her body noticed before her mind caught up. Her eyes lifted toward the far corner of the room. He was alone in a corner booth by the windows, half sheltered by a high-backed banquette and a pane of expensive glass that reflected the city lights. She'd seen him earlier in the evening, when the restaurant was still full and laughter came easily from the bar. He had been there for hours, yet he never looked bored. He sat with a kind of stillness that vibrated with control. Marco De Laurentiis. Lena didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type. Early 40s. Maybe. With dark hair touched faintly with silver at the temples. His suit fell perfectly over his shoulders. Not a wrinkle in sight. The fabric rich in a way only money could buy. His tie was understated. His watch elegant but not flashy. He wasn't the kind of man who announced himself. He didn't need to. The room adjusted around him without him lifting a finger. Every time she passed his table, she tried not to stare. His features were sharp, but not cruel. His mouth set in a line that was almost calm, and yet held something harder beneath. His eyes were what unsettled her most intense. Focused. The dark kind that seemed to weigh everything and give nothing away. When she'd poured his wine earlier, he had thanked her in a voice so soft she almost missed it. His gaze met hers for one brief second, and the contact hit her with unexpected force. He looked at her, like he actually saw her. Lena had dropped her eyes immediately, forcing herself back into the comfort of invisibility. Men like him didn't notice women like her unless they wanted something. She had learned that lesson too many times to forget. The restaurant was thinning out now. The last of the dessert plates were being cleared, and the bar had quieted to a few stragglers nursing their drinks. The hostess yawned behind her stand, pretending not to. Somewhere in the back, the dishwasher hummed. Another night almost over. The front door opened. For a second. Lena thought nothing of it. People came and went all the time. But the soft chime that usually announced new arrivals stayed silent. 5 men stepped inside, and every sense in her body went on alert. They wore suits, but not the right kind. The cuts were too sharp, the fits a little too tight, the fabrics just a shade too loud for old Charleston money. Their shoes looked heavy rather than polished, built for moving fast instead of standing through a 4-course meal. Their watches gleamed like they'd been bought for show. They didn't pause at the host stand. It didn't glance toward the menus. Didn't offer polite smiles. They spread out. One took up position near the bar, leaning against it without ordering. Another moved toward the hallway that led to the private dining room. A third angled himself near the kitchen doors. The last two held back, claiming ground near the entrance, as if guarding it. They didn't speak, but the air shifted around them. Conversation at the remaining tables faltered. A businessman near the center of the room closed his laptop with forced casualness and began to pack up. An older couple murmured to each other and asked for their check. No one said the word, but everyone felt it something was wrong. Lena's manager disappeared into his office, without a word. The door shutting with a final click that sounded louder than it should have. The bartender busied himself polishing glasses he'd cleaned twice already. A busboy who normally clung to overtime vanished. Apron abandoned in a heap by the service station. Within minutes, the room was almost empty. Lena stood by the waiter's station. Her hands wrapped around a water pitcher that was already full. She watched the patterns in front of her, without turning her head. Panic would only make her visible. Visible was the last thing she could afford to be. She counted exits. Counted bodies. Counted heartbeats. Marco hadn't moved. He sat exactly where he'd been all evening. The documents in front of him untouched. His wine glass half full. From a distance, he looked almost relaxed. But when Lena let her gaze slide to his face, she saw it, the slight tension in his jaw, the barely there line between his brows. His posture was still, but his attention had sharpened to a razor's edge. He knew. Her eyes dropped, tracking the man positioned near the bar. Broad shoulders, scar running from his left ear down toward his collar. His hands were folded in front of him. Casual and wrong. When he shifted, the edge of his jacket gaped just enough for Lena to see it, a glimpse of copper wire and a small black box, nestled where it shouldn't be. Her mouth went dry. She had seen that exact setup once before. In another life. In another apartment where the wallpaper had peeled and the neighbors turned the music up to drown out bad nights. Her ex had been proud of his toys' remote detonators. Pressure triggers. He'd shown them off to his crew while she pretended not to listen from the other room. Step on the wrong spot, and boom, he'd said. Laughing. Lena swallowed hard. The room blurred for a second, then snapped into perfect focus. Under the corner booth, beneath the elegant white tablecloth and polished wood, there would be a device waiting for someone to stand up. Waiting for the body heat and pressure of a man like Marco to shift even slightly. That was all it would take. Every survival instinct she'd honed screamed at her to leave. She knew how to walk away from danger. She'd done it before, left everything behind and never looked back. She could slip into the kitchen, out through the alley, disappear into another city, under another name. Her fingers closed around a bottle of red wine at the station. A good vintage. One of the expensive ones the kitchen staff joked they'd never taste. It felt heavy in her hand. Solid. Real. It gave her something to hold on to when the rest of her wanted to shake. Her feet moved before she made the decision. She walked toward the corner booth with the practiced ease of a woman doing her job. The men scattered around the room tracked her lightly. Unconcerned. Just a waitress, they thought. Just a girl in a black uniform with an apron tied too tight. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her throat. But her step stayed steady. Marco looked up as she approached. Eyes dark and sharp. Up close. He was even more unsettling. Calm in a way no one should be, with death sitting quietly beneath their chair. She forced her breathing to slow. She'd poured wine for difficult men before. She knew how to stand close without leaning in. How to seem smaller than she was. She angled the bottle toward his glass. Letting the first smooth stream of wine fall, she leaned in just enough that her hair curtained the side of her face from the rest of the room. Just enough that her lips were near his ear. If you stand up, she whispered. Her voice barely audible, under the soft sound of pouring wine. You die. He went still. Not the casual stillness he'd had all evening. But the total, absolute stop of someone whose body had just been given a command it couldn't ignore. His hands remained on the table, but his eyes snapped to hers for one heartbeat. They simply stared at each other. She didn't look away. Couldn't. Those dark eyes searched her face, testing, measuring, trying to determine if she was hysterical, lying. Misstagen. He must have seen something there, terror. Maybe. But not the wild kind. The kind that knew exactly how bad this could get. His jaw flexed once. He did not move his legs. Lena finished pouring, the glass filling to the perfect level, out of sheer habit. She set the bottle down with a quiet touch. Her fingers steady enough that even she was surprised. She straightened slowly. He slid her professional mask back over her features and stepped away as if nothing had happened. She could feel the scarred man at the bar watching her, his gaze heavy between her shoulder blades. She didn't hurry. That would draw attention. She stopped at an empty table and rearranged silverware that didn't need arranging, adding a folded napkin that wasn't necessary. Her hands only trembled when she turned them out of sight. Minutes stretched. The 5 men waited for movement that didn't come. They had expected a reaction, a startled rise from the booth, a cursed word, a decision to confront or flee. Instead, Marco remained exactly where he was, as if welded to the leather seat. His eyes no longer strayed to the documents in front of him. They followed Lena when she moved. Not with panic, but with a kind of focused curiosity. She disappeared briefly into the kitchen, more for a breath than for any real task. Through the small round window in the swinging door, she could still see him. Still there, still breathing. His hands now rested flat on the tablecloth. If fingers spread. The picture of a man who refused to give death the satisfaction of seeing him shake. The back of house was nearly empty. The chef had left. The dishwashers had skipped a smoke break. The line cooks had vanished with the last of the orders. The clatter and heat that usually filled the space had died, leaving only the hum of appliances and the echo of her own breath. She was alone. Alone with a bomb. 5 strangers who smelled like trouble, and a man who now knew his life balanced on the weight of his own body. Lena pushed back through the kitchen doors, emerging again into the dining room, with empty hands. She forced her steps to slow, to mimic the unhurried rhythm of a server checking on her last table. "Is there anything else I can get for you tonight?" "Sir," she asked softly, when she reached him again. Her voice level, neutral. Not a hint of the fact that her lungs hadn't drawn a full breath in what felt like an hour. For the first time, his composure cracked just enough for her to see the strain underneath. His face had lost a little color. On his shoulders, a fine tremor rested like static. His eyes lifted to hers, and what she saw there made her chest tighten gratitude. Yes, but also an edge of something that looked like reluctant respect. "No," he said quietly. "I'm waiting for someone." They both knew it was a lie. The front doors opened again. 2 men in dark security uniforms walked in. The kind she recognized from the private events the restaurant sometimes hosted. They scanned the room with trained eyes and took everything in at once. The scattered placement of the 5 strangers. The way the room had emptied. The rigid posture of the man in the corner booth. "Gentlemen," the taller of the 2 said. Voice calm but firm. "The restaurant is closed for the evening. You'll need to settle your business elsewhere." For a beat, no one moved. Then the scarred leader's jaw worked once. He gave a small, sharp nod, and the 5 men shifted as one. Their formation reformed. Turning toward the exit, they left with the same unnerving calm they'd arrived with. No backward glances. No threats tossed over their shoulders. The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slammed door Lena had ever heard. The room exhaled. The security team stayed close. One at the window, watching the street. The other near the corner booth. The taller guard glanced at Marco. "Don't move yet," he said quietly. "Give it a few minutes. If they're watching from outside, they'll want to see if you panic." Marco gave the barest nod. Lena stood by a nearby table, fingers digging into the back of a chair. The adrenaline that had kept her moving now threatened to pull her knees out from under her. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder with each heartbeat. Blue and red lights began to flicker against the front windows. Bomb squad. Police. Questions. She knew what came next. Statements. Reports. Names run through databases. Faces matched to old records. Every part of her old life clawed at the edges of the new one she'd been trying to build. If she stayed, she would become real on paper. And real was the one thing she could never afford to be. Marco's gaze found her again. "How did you know?" he asked. His voice low, but cutting through the noise as the sirens drew closer. It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was something sharper. Deeper. She could have lied. Should have. She could have said she'd seen a wire. That she'd guessed. That it was intuition. Instead, she heard herself answer with the truth. Her words soft but clear. "I've seen that kind of setup before." The guard at the window called out. Vehicles gone. Headed south. The sirens were nearly at the door now. "You should go," Marco said quietly. Eyes locked on hers. "Before they start asking questions." For a moment, Lena didn't move. She stood in the echo of what they'd just survived. In the strange, charged space between his steady gaze and the knowledge that after tonight, nothing in her life would be simple again. Then she nodded once. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant. Her footsteps steady, disappearing the way she'd always done through the kitchen. Out into the alley. Into the shadows. She left behind the apron, the name tag, the illusion of a small, safe life, but she carried something new with her now. Somewhere in Charleston, a very dangerous man knew her face, had heard her whisper, and owed his life to a girl who'd chosen, just once, not to run. The story didn't end when Lena slipped out the back door. By morning, it had grown teeth. The explosion never happened. But the bomb was real enough to make headlines. Local news called it a credible threat at an upscale downtown restaurant. They mentioned the evacuation, the bomb squad, the discovery of a device under the chair of a high-profile businessman whose name is being withheld pending investigation. Lena watched the coverage from the edge of her thrift store couch. Still in the clothes she'd worn home the night before. Apron tossed in a heap on the floor. Her small apartment felt even smaller, with the reporter's voice echoing off the peeling walls. They didn't say her name. But it didn't matter. She knew how this worked. The police would pull staff lists. They'd review security footage. They'd talk to anyone who had been on shift. They'd notice one waitress who'd vanished before the sirens arrived. Her phone buzzed on the wobbly coffee table. She stared at the screen, dread coiling in her stomach. 3 missed calls from the restaurant manager. 2 from an unknown number. A new voicemail notification blinked at her like an accusation. She swallowed and pressed play. "Miss Hart. This is Detective Anders, with the Charleston Police Department. We need you to come in and give a statement regarding last night's incident. Please return this call as soon as possible." Her real last name wasn't Hart. Her real first name wasn't Lena. The detective's voice went on, calm and professional. But she barely heard the rest. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. If she walked into a police station, they'd ask for ID. They'd run her information. They'd dig. That was what they did. And somewhere, buried in the tangled mess of her past, were names and faces and records she had no intention of ever seeing again. She set the phone down and pressed her palms into her eyes, until bright white sparks flashed behind her lids. Running had kept her alive this long, but running had always been her choice. This time, it felt like she was being herded toward an edge. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Different area code. Her first instinct was to let it ring, to pretend she wasn't here. Her second instinct, the one that had made her walk toward a bomb instead of away from it, made her pick up. She lifted the phone to her ear but didn't speak. Elena. The voice on the other end was low, smooth, and unmistakable. It carried the same quiet authority it had at the restaurant, but with something else threaded through it now. Something like concern. "Nobody calls me that," she said, before she could stop herself. "You haven't let anyone." He replied, "That's different." She swallowed. The fake name felt suddenly too tight around her. "You have the wrong number." "No," he said softly. "I don't." Silence stretched between them. She could have hung up. She didn't. "The police are looking for you," he continued. "They called me this morning. They want to know why you left before they arrived. Why the girl who warned me isn't on any of their reports." Elena stared at the blank TV screen. "I can't go in," she said. "I can't do that. Not with the name they have." "I know," he said. Those two words landed with more weight than anything else he'd said. "Last night you kept me breathing," he added after a beat. "Let me return the favor." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree," he said. "I'm sending you an address. Come alone. If you decide not to, I won't call again." Her phone pinged a second later. A text appearing with a location in the historic district. No name. No instructions. Just numbers on a street she'd never had a reason to walk down. "If this is a trap," she said. "It's a very polite one." His chuckle was low and brief. "If I wanted you dragged into something, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd already be there." The honesty of it stole her breath more than any threat could have. People who played games didn't admit how easily they could have broken you. She waited. "Elena," he said quietly. "You know what you risk by going to the police. You know exactly how far your name will carry before it stops being yours. Come see me instead. If you don't like what I offer, you can walk away." "And if I don't come at all?" she asked. "Then I hope whatever you're running from never learns your new address," he said. "But I think we both know hope has never done much for either of us." The line clicked dead. She sat there for a long moment. In her hand. Heart racing. He knew her real first name. That alone should have sent her packing in the opposite direction. Instead, it did something she didn't expect. It made her feel visible. Marco's office was in a building old enough to remember when Charleston streets ran with horse-drawn carriages instead of cars. The wrought iron balconies and weathered brick whispered of old money and older secrets. Elena lingered across the street for a full minute before crossing, watching men and women in suits walk in and out like they'd been born knowing where their feet belonged. She pushed through the heavy front door and was greeted by cool air and polished wood. The woman at the front desk wore a blazer and an expression that said she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked. Elena's throat felt dry. "Someone texted me this address," she said. "I was told to come alone." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, then glanced at her screen. Whatever she saw there made her posture straighten slightly. "Third floor," she said. "End of the hall. De Laurentiis, Associates." The old elevator groaned as it carried her up. Her reflection in the brass paneling looked like a stranger tired eyes. Hair pulled back. Clothes that didn't match the quality of the building. She had changed outfits 3 times before leaving her apartment. trying to find something that said normal instead of running. Nothing in her closet had quite managed it. The door at the end of the hallway was frosted glass with a simple plaque. She lifted her hand, hesitated, then pushed it open. The man from the corner booth stood by the window. Sleeves rolled up, jacket off, tee loosened. In the softer light of his office, he looked less like a statue carved out of stone and more like something human-shaped and dangerous. He turned when she entered. "You came," he said. "You didn't exactly make it sound optional," she replied, before she could temper the edge in her voice. He almost smiled. "Almost. If I wanted you brought here," he said. "You'd already be sitting in that chair, with your hands zip-tied behind you. You walked in. That matters." She followed his gaze to the leather chair in front of his desk, then pulled her eyes back to his. "So," she said, staying by the door, "you know my real name." "Elena Reyes," he said. "You wait tables under the name Lena Hart. You've lived in that apartment on Calhoun for 11 months. You pay your rent in cash. Your ID would fall apart under real scrutiny after about 15 minutes. Her stomach dropped. "You did all that in one night." "No," he said. "I did it in 2 hours." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "If this is supposed to make me feel safe, you're doing a really bad job." It studied her for a quiet moment, hands resting loosely on the edge of his desk. "You're not safe," he said simply. "Not with the police looking for you. Not with whoever put that bomb under my chair knowing your face is on the surveillance footage. That's the point." He gestured to the chair. "Sit," he said. "Or don't. But if you're going to walk away, do it knowing exactly what you're walking back into." Something in his tone made it worse that he wasn't raising his voice. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Elena moved slowly to the chair and sat, perched on the edge, ready to bolt. "What do you want from me?" she asked. He leaned back against the corner of his desk, close enough that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes. "You warned me," he said. "You could have slipped out the back and disappeared. Instead, you walked toward a bomb to whisper 6 words. Nobody does that unless they're either suicidal, stupid, or very, very tired of running." He let that sit. In the quiet, she heard her own breath. "I don't think you're suicidal," he added. "And you're clearly not stupid. So I'm tired," she finished softly. His eyes softened just a fraction. "What are you running from?" "Elena," she almost lied. The instinct rose so quickly it was almost muscle memory. Make something up. Give him half-truths. Pretend the past was blurry. But he had stayed in that seat because she told him to. He had trusted a whisper. There was a kind of debt in that. One that didn't have numbers attached. "My ex," she said finally. He liked feeling bigger than he was. He got involved with people who enjoyed scaring small-time dealers more than paying them. When I realized I was one of the things he thought he owned, I left. "How long ago?" Marco asked. 2 years, she said. 3 cities. 4 names. "And if the police pull your file?" he asked. "If they run your prints, what pops up?" "Nothing good," she said. "And nothing that's my fault, but nobody believes that part." He nodded slowly. "You can't walk into a station," he said. "You're not wrong about that." "So what now?" she asked. "I keep dodging phone calls until they decide I'm guilty of something and come kick my door in." "No," he said. "That's what happens if you try to do this alone." He straightened, as if deciding something. "I'm going to make you an offer. 2. Actually," she watched him warily. "First," he said, "I can make Elena Reyes real. Documents that hold up under federal scrutiny. Work history. Tax records. a paper trail that doesn't end in a question mark. You become someone who can walk into a DMV without sweating. She stared. You can just do that. I can, he said. And it would come with a legitimate job at one of my restaurants. Front of house. Normal hours. Regular checks. Something boring enough that no one looks too closely at anything else. And the second offer, she asked. He met her gaze head on. Protection, he said. Real protection, not just hiding better. You stay in a secure building I own. You get a new phone, with one number programmed in it. Mine. Something feels off. You call. You see that SUV again that doesn't belong. You call. Anyone from your past shows up. You call. He paused. You stay under my umbrella. And nobody touches you, unless they want a war they can't win. It was an absurd offer. It was also the most tempting thing anyone had ever said to her. And what do you get out of it? She asked. Voice. Low. He held her gaze. You were in that room last night, he said. You saw who came for me. How they moved. How they placed that device. People underestimate you. They look through you. That's useful. I run businesses that attract attention. I need people who notice what others don't. You want me to spy for you? She said. I want you to pay attention. He corrected. To tell me when something feels wrong. To trust your instincts, instead of pretending not to see. The rest, we'll talk about if you decide you want more than a restaurant job. And if I say no, then I wire $20,000 to whatever account you want, he said. Or hand it to you in cash if you'd rather not have anything with your name on it. I give you the number of a man who can get you passable documents. And you run again? Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. But you'll have a head start. He leaned in slightly. No threats. No strings. You saved my life. Elena, I'm not going to repay that by trapping you. She was quiet for a long moment. The city hummed faintly beyond the window. Somewhere below. Cars rolled past. People walked dogs. Lives went on like bombs never sat under chairs. Why me? She asked finally. You must have people already. People with clean records and proper training and less baggage. Because when everyone else in that restaurant found a reason to leave, he said, you walked straight toward the problem. You didn't even hesitate. His mouth quirked, faintly. I don't waste that kind of courage. Her chest ached. Courage was not what she would have called it. Desperation. Maybe. Exhaustion. A moment of not wanting to be the kind of person who vanished again. Okay, she said quietly. I'll take it. The job. The documents. The umbrella. He nodded once. The motion small but decisive. Then let's get you somewhere safer than whatever you're calling home right now. The penthouse wasn't a mansion. That was the first relief. It was high up in a glass and concrete building that looked like every other upscale tower downtown. Inside, everything gleamed stainless steel. Clean lines. Big windows that looked out over the city and the water beyond. It smelled like new furniture and fresh paint. Not memory. There's food in the kitchen, Marco said, standing in the doorway as she stepped inside. Her single duffel bag hanging off her shoulder. Security downstairs is tight. Nobody gets up here without someone sending them. She set the bag down. I'm suddenly aware of how small her life looked against all this square footage. This is too much, she said. His expression didn't change. It's standard for executives. He said, you're not the first person I've put here. That might have been a lie. It was hard to tell. But he wasn't hovering. He wasn't demanding gratitude. He was giving her space. He set a phone on the kitchen counter. This is yours, he said. My number's already in it. If something feels off, even if you think you're overreacting, you call. Understood. She nodded. He watched her for a moment. Then softened. You did a reckless thing last night. He said. Reckless in my favor. Let me be reckless in yours for a while. He left after that. The door closing quietly behind him. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the silence. For the first time in years, she wasn't listening for footsteps on the stairs or voices in the hall. The quiet felt almost violent. That night, she slept with the bedroom door cracked and the new phone on the pillow beside her. She woke twice, heart racing, certain she'd heard something. Both times, the only sound was the distant hum of the city through thick glass. The next morning, he called. How did you sleep? He asked. She almost laughed, like someone put me in a museum. She said, I'm scared to touch anything. You'll get used to it. He said, your temporary ID will be ready in 2 days. You'll start at the restaurant after that. Until then, don't go anywhere alone. Is this how you talk to all your employees? She asked. No, he said. Just the ones who have people looking for them. Their calls stayed short at first. He'd check in, ask if she'd noticed anything strange, tell her what time someone would be dropping paperwork by. Over time, the edges softened. She learned he took his coffee black. No sugar. No cream. He learned she dumped in so much sugar it barely qualified as coffee anymore. She heard him stifle a yawn once, and realized he was calling from his office in the grey light of dawn. She asked when he'd gone home. He said nothing for a long beat, then admitted he hadn't. You know sleep is a thing people do. Right, she said. People with fewer enemies. He replied. She found herself smiling after they hung up. It wasn't smart to like him. But feelings didn't ask permission. Days slipped by, in a strange, suspended rhythm. She walked around the penthouse barefoot. She read through the folder of documents that laid out her new life in neat, official lines. Elena Reyes. Born in Savannah. Community college dropout. Years of retail and restaurant work. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Invisible in a completely different way. On the 6th morning, she woke up with a knot in her gut and no idea why. She pushed back the curtains and froze. A black SUV idled across the street. Windows tinted too dark to see inside. It had no visible plates from this angle. It had been there long enough for condensation to gather faintly on the windshield, broken only by the occasional swipe of the wipers. Elena didn't move closer to the glass. She stepped back instead, a phone already in her hand before she even realized she was dialing. He picked up on the first ring. There's a car watching the building, she said. Voice low. Steady. Black SUV. Dark windows. No visible tags from where I am. It's been there at least 15 minutes. Silence on his end. Then the rustle of fabric. The distant click of a door closing. Stay away from the windows, he said. His tone, suddenly sharp with command. Don't turn on any more lights. My people are on their way. Is it them? She asked. Even though she already knew, the same men who planted that device work for people who don't like loose ends. He said. You warned me. They saw you. They're reminding us of that fact. Should I pack? She asked. No, he said. Should you be afraid? Yes. But you shouldn't run. That's what they want. They push. You disappear. They learn exactly how far they have to go to move my pieces. I don't give them that satisfaction. A breath hitched in her chest. What do I do then? You wait, he said. And you trust me to do what you did in that restaurant? What's that? She asked. Walk toward the danger instead of pretending it isn't there. She heard herself exhale. On the street below, 2 men in maintenance uniforms appeared from a side alley. moving casually toward the SUV. They looked like they were dealing with a problem with the curb. A loose grate. A misaligned pipe. Their focus never quite landed on the vehicle. But their path circled it twice. Her phone buzzed again, a few minutes later. "It's just surveillance," Marco said. "No explosives. No immediate threat. They want you rattled." "Too late," she murmured. "That's why I'm coming," he said. "You don't have to, Elena." He interrupted gently. "You don't run from this. Not alone. Pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight." "Where am I going?" she asked. "To the one place in this city where they'd have to be suicidal to follow you," he said. "My home." Fear, and something she didn't want to name, twisted together in her chest. She had walked into his world to get away from her past. Now his world was walking right up to her door. He protected her like she mattered. And for the first time in her life, she found herself wanting to trust that more than her own instinct to disappear. Marco's house didn't look like the kind of place a man like him would live. It wasn't a glass tower, or a sterile, modern box in the clouds. It was old brick and white columns. Tucked behind a wrought iron gate, beneath live oak draped in Spanish moss. Gas lamps flickered on either side of the front door, their soft light throwing moving shadows across the porch. It felt less like a fortress and more like a secret. Elena stood in the foyer, with her duffel bag at her feet. The echo of the closing door, settling around her like a cloak. The floors were dark wood. Polished, but not flashy. The walls held framed photographs instead of art meant to impress. Family. Men in suits standing near ships. A boy who might have been Marco at 12. Expression serious, even then. She didn't belong here. That was her first thought. Marco set his keys in a dish on the entry table and turned to face her. His posture looser than she'd ever seen it outside this space. "Jacket gone. Tea off." The house seemed to let him breathe. "This is your house," she said quietly, as if she needed to hear it out loud. His mouth tugged faintly. "So I'm told," he said. "I'm still getting used to it." "You brought me here," she replied. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, searching her face. "Because the men watching your building don't care about lines," he said. "Police. Cameras. Witnesses. They know how to work around all of that. But this," he nodded toward the thick walls around them. "This is different. They don't cross this threshold. Not if they want to keep breathing." He stepped closer, his voice softening into something that didn't sound like it was meant for boardrooms or backroom deals. "You'll be safe here," he said. "No one touches what I protect." The words landed like a promise carved into stone. She should have flinched at the possessiveness of it. She'd run from a man who liked to call her his. But this felt different. The claim wasn't about ownership, it was about responsibility. About a man who understood exactly how dangerous he was to his enemies and was willing to turn that danger outward instead of inward. He led her down a hallway, to a guest room that was bigger than her entire last apartment. A wide bed, soft grey walls, a window looking out over a small private garden where camellias bloomed despite the season. He left her there with fresh towels and that same quiet promise hanging in the air. "If you need anything," he said, hand on the doorframe. "I'm down the hall. And I mean that literally and otherwise." She almost joked that she'd call if the ghosts of his ancestors showed up. But the words caught in her throat. "Instead," she nodded. "Marco." He paused. "This isn't charity?" she asked. "You're not going to hold it over my head someday?" His gaze held hers, steadily. "You gave me my life back," he said. "All of this is still here because you whispered 6 words in the dark. I don't call that charity, Elena. I call it evening the score." When he was gone, she sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tangled in the comforter. The house was quiet, in a way that felt heavy rather than empty. Somewhere, she could hear the faint clink of glass, the murmur of his voice, speaking to someone on the phone. Low and controlled, the rhythm of a man putting pieces in motion. She told herself sleep wouldn't come. It always took her hours to unwind when she changed places. New roofs meant new threats. New doors meant new escape routes to memorize. But that night, in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and laundry soap, with thick walls muffling the outside world, her body made the decision for her. The last thing she remembered was the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. The next thing she knew, pale light was creeping around the edges of the curtains, and the clock on the nightstand read just after 8. She lay there for a moment, stunned by how deeply she'd slept. For the first time in years, she hadn't dreamed of locked doors and shattering glass. No hands grabbing her wrist. No raised voices. Just quiet. She padded barefoot down the hall, drawn by the smell of coffee. Marco stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, one hand around a mug, the other resting on the island. He looked like he'd been there for hours. "You slept," he observed, looking at her with something like satisfaction. "You look less haunted." She huffed out a soft breath. "Thanks. I think..." He poured her a cup and slid it across the counter. She found sugar and proceeded to dump in 3 heaping spoonfuls. His eyes widened slightly. "That's a crime," he said. "Whatever that is." "It isn't coffee. It's survival," she replied. "We can't all live on black coffee and unresolved trauma." His mouth actually curved at that. A quick flash of amusement that made him look younger, less carved from stone. She watched that expression. Something warm unlocking in her chest. They drank in a comfortable silence for a moment. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in the air. Outside, the world continued without caring that someone had tried to blow him up a few nights ago. Her mind drifted to the SUV, to the men who had sat inside, watching her building with patient malice, to the bomb under his chair, to the way the scarred man's jaw had tightened when he realized the plan was unraveling. "Marco," she said slowly, "the ones who came for you, they work shipping routes, don't they? Ports, cargo, that kind of thing." His gaze sharpened. "Among other businesses," he said. Why something clicked into place in her memory. A conversation she had filed away as unimportant back when she was just trying to survive nights and keep her head low. "My ex," she said, the words tasting like something she wanted to spit out. He liked to brag about people he worked for, about jobs he almost got. He mentioned a crew once, out of Savannah, said they were smarter than your usual smugglers, that they used real manifests and just edited them. Hijacked space in legit shipments. Cigarettes. Guns. Sometimes people... Marco set his mug down. His full attention locked on her. He said they had someone in the Port Authority on their payroll. She continued, heart picking up speed. That it all looked clean if anyone glanced at the paperwork. But if you knew what to look for, there were patterns, same company names, same warehouses. He thought it was genius. He wanted in. They said he was too loud. "Savannah," Marco repeated quietly. "Your ex worked for them directly." "No," she said. "He was adjacent. Dealers who bought from people who bought from them. But he was obsessed. He kept every scrap of info he could get. Names, locations, companies. I thought it was just him playing pretend. But now," she trailed off. For a split second, doubt flickered. Maybe she was reaching. Maybe she was connecting dots that didn't form anything real. Marco didn't dismiss it. He didn't wave it away as coincidence. He stepped closer, eyes intent, Do you remember any of the company names? He asked. Warehouses, street names. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back into that cramped apartment with the thin walls and the man whose voice used to slither through her sleep. Chatham Logistics, she said slowly. Fulton, imports. There was a Bayline, storage. I think. And he always talked about one warehouse on Riverfront. Number 12. He said if he ever made it big, that's where he'd celebrate. Because that place never got checked. When she opened her eyes, Marco's face was different. Something calculating and fierce had settled there. That's enough, he said. More than enough. You think it's them, she said. I know it's them, he replied. I've been trying to prove their roots for years. They've been trying to choke my businesses off at the docks. I knew they had someone in Port Authority. But I didn't have a name, or a pattern. You just handed me both. Guilt brushed her spine. I should have told you sooner, she said. I didn't connect it. I just wanted him out of my head. You weren't supposed to have to connect it, he said. That wasn't your problem. His tone softened. And he added, until they made you part of it. He picked up his phone, thumb already moving over the screen. I need to make some calls, he said. Stay here. If you see any cars you don't recognize in the alley, you call me. That list you just gave me, it's going to change everything. She watched him, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. Her past had always felt like dead weight. Something ugly she carried alone. The idea that it might actually be useful. That the information she'd been trying so hard to forget could help end something. It shifted something deep inside her. For once. Maybe. What she'd survived could hurt the right people instead of just her. The negotiation didn't happen in a warehouse or at the back of a restaurant. It happened in a panelled conference room overlooking the harbour. In a building where men wore suits and called each other counselor. Marco told her he was going to a meeting. He did not tell her with whom. He didn't have to. She could read the tension in his shoulders. The hard set of his mouth. Are you walking into a trap? She asked quietly as he put on his jacket in the foyer. If I were, I wouldn't go alone, he said. This isn't that kind of conversation. They've seen what I can do when I'm cornered. Today is about making sure no one needs to find out what happens next if they push further. And me, she asked. What am I in all this? He paused. Then turned fully to her. You, he said, are the line in the sand. She swallowed. That seems excessive. He shook his head. They tried to kill me, and didn't care who else got caught in the blast. I can tolerate a lot of things in this business. Elena. But not that. His voice dropped. And I don't tolerate anyone hunting under my roof. Or going after what's under my protection. He left with two men she recognized from the SUV inspection. Their presence understated, but lethal. The house felt very large, and very quiet after the door closed. Hours stretched. She tried to read, tried to watch TV, tried to nap. None of it stuck. Her mind kept circling back to him, sitting across from men who had hired others to put a bomb under his chair. To the risk he was taking by walking into a room with people who preferred solving problems with explosions and guns. By the time his car pulled back through the front gate, the sun was sliding low, turning the sky the color of old bruise. She stood in the foyer, hands twisted together. Before he even stepped through the door, he looked tired. There was a new shadow along his jaw from a day without shaving. His tie had been abandoned somewhere, his top button undone. But his eyes, those were steady. Well, she asked, voice barely above a whisper. It's done, he said. What does that mean? She needed specifics. Not vague declarations. It means, he said slowly, that I gave them a choice. They withdraw from my shipping lanes. They pull their men out of Charleston. They stopped circling my properties like vultures. In return, he exhaled. In return, the evidence built on those names you gave me doesn't end up on a federal agent's desk. Blackmail, she said. Leverage. He countered. They understand that word better. Her heart pounded. And they agreed. They agreed. His gaze softened. But that wasn't my only condition. An uneasy chill slid down her spine. What else did you ask for? That your name, he said, never pass their lips in any context, except as a warning to leave you alone, that your face get dropped from any files they've stored, that their people understand that any move against you, no matter how indirect, is a move against me. Her breath caught. Marco, you didn't have to.
Yes.
He interrupted gently. I did. That puts a target on your back, she said. For me, they could come after you because of you, he finished. They already are. You just didn't know it before. She shook her head, struggling to catch up. So, what, I'm some kind of clause in a treaty now? You are, he said. Someone whose safety I made. Non-negotiable. Even to men who think nothing of making people disappear. His words sank in slowly. Like rain into hard-packed earth. She was free. Not just hiding better. Not just buying time in another city, under another name. For the first time since she'd packed a bag and walked out of a life she thought she'd be stuck in forever. She wasn't calculating how long it would take someone to track her down. What does that actually look like? She asked. For me, it looks like you walking into the DMV with your real name on the form. He said. It looks like you opening a bank account that won't be frozen in 6 months. Signing a lease if you ever decide you don't want to live in buildings with my name on the deed. Getting a job because you want it. Not because it's the only one you can get without someone running a background check. The knot she'd been carrying in her chest for years loosened all at once. It left her dizzy. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. Live without checking over my shoulder every 10 seconds. You'll learn, he said. Humans are annoyingly adaptable. She managed a shaky laugh. And you? What do you get now that the dust has settled? He shrugged one shoulder. Peace, he said. For a while. Breathing room for my people. Fewer bombs under chairs. That's not what I meant, she said quietly. His eyes darkened. But he didn't look away. You, he said. I get to stop wondering if the girl who saved my life is sleeping in a place where the locks can be kicked in with one good hit. Silence stretched. A different kind this time. He cleared his throat slightly, as if resetting something inside himself. There's one more thing, he said. You should hear it now. While this is all fresh. Her stomach fluttered. That sounds ominous. It isn't, he said. It's the opposite. His jaw flexed. Like he was forcing himself to use muscles that had atrophied from lack of practice. You don't owe me anything, Elena. Not your presence. Not your gratitude. Not your future. You're free to go wherever you want. Do whatever you want. My protection doesn't come with a leash. The words knocked the air out of her more than any threat could have. You're saying I can just leave, she said slowly. After all of this, I'm saying you can walk out that door, he replied, nodding toward the street. And never call my number again. You'll still have the documents. The job at the restaurant if you want it. The treaty holds whether you're under my roof or not. And if I stay, she whispered. His gaze searched her face. Whatever he saw there made his voice drop even lower. If you stay, he said. It won't be because you're running out of places to go. It will be because you choose this. Choose me. Without debt hanging over it. She didn't answer immediately. She walked past him into the living room. To the window that looked out over the garden. The camellias were still blooming. stubborn and soft against the leaves. The city lay beyond, lights flickering on as the sky darkened. She thought about all the places she'd lived in the last few years. Rooms with borrowed furniture, apartments where neighbors avoided eye contact, and landlords only cared that the cash was on time. Cities that never learned her name, because she never stayed long enough to let them. She thought about the way he'd sat perfectly still, while death waited beneath his chair, just because she told him to. About the phone calls at dawn. The coffee, the way he'd listened to her, like every word mattered. The way he'd walked into a negotiation not just to protect his territory, but to put her in the center of the terms. Her feet moved before her brain had finished the math. She turned from the window and crossed the space between them, stopping close enough to see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. His hands hung loose at his sides, as if he were deliberately not reaching for her. Her fingers found his. He inhaled sharply, eyes flicking down to where her hand wrapped around his, then back up to her face. "I don't want to leave," she said. The change in him was subtle but unmistakable. The tension he wore like armor cracked. Just a little. The hardness around his eyes melted into something softer, something almost disbelieving. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "This life, it's not easy. Being near me will never be completely safe. There will always be people who don't like that I exist. That we exist. I've been unsafe my entire adult life," she said. "At least here I know what's coming. At least here. I'm not hiding from ghosts alone in a place that doesn't know my name." His thumb brushed once across the back of her hand. A small, reverent gesture that felt more intimate than any embrace. "Then stay," he said softly. "Not as someone I'm protecting. Not as a debt I'm paying off. Stay as someone who belongs here, beside me. On purpose." Warmth spread through her chest. Slow and steady. Pushing back the cold that had been there for so long, she'd stopped noticing it. She squeezed his hand. "Okay," she said. "But I'm keeping the job at the restaurant. And the sugar in my coffee." His laugh came out low and genuine. "I wouldn't dare take either," he said. 6 months later, the dining room at Harbourside hummed with the comfortable chaos of a successful dinner rush. Plates moved from kitchen to table in a smooth, practiced rhythm. Glasses clinked. Conversations rose and fell like waves. Near the pass, a woman in a tailored black vest and crisp white shirt stood with a ticket book in one hand, calling out orders with a confidence that made the line cook grin and nod. "Elena, table 12 wants to talk catering." A server called as he passed. "Tell them I'll be right there," she replied, scribbling a quick note and tucking the pen behind her ear. Her name tag gleamed on her vest. Elena Reyes. No alias. No borrowed name. No lieu. When she glanced up, she saw him. Marco sat at a small table near the kitchen, close enough to watch her work without getting in the way. He wore a suit, but his tie was loose. His attention divided between his untouched espresso and the woman moving through the dining room like she'd been born to orchestrate it. She made her way over between tables, dropping a quiet instruction to a server, straightening a fork, lifting an eyebrow at a busboy who'd missed a crumb. When she reached him, she rested her hand lightly on the back of his chair for a second, their own quiet greeting. "Anything unusual tonight?" he asked, looking up at her. She scanned the room quickly, then shook her head. "Just table 12, wondering if we do weddings," she said. "You ready to branch out into emotional chaos?" "Are we?" he countered, amusement flickering in his eyes. She smiled, the expression easy and real. "I hear there's demand," she said. His gaze dropped to her name tag, then rose again, and something in it made her heart kick against her ribs. Pride, relief, A fierce kind of protectiveness that had nothing to do with owing and everything to do with choosing. She touched his shoulder briefly before turning back toward the kitchen. The gesture small, but intimate. He watched her go. That faint, softened curve still on his lips. Once. He had sat in a room full of crystal and danger, waiting for someone to decide if he lived or died. Once. She had walked toward that danger with nothing but a wine bottle and a whisper. Now. He watched her move through a room he owned, wearing a name she owned. In a life they were building, not out of fear, but out of something that felt suspiciously like hope. For the first time, in a very long time, neither of them was running. Before you go, if you enjoyed Elena and Marco's story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a good slow burn romance. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest, or whether you want more stories in this world. Your support truly means the world, and it helps me create more stories just like this one. Thank you for being here.